Well, hello one and all, and welcome to our short on conditionals. We'll see here how we can use these things called conditionals to ask questions in our program and have our program take different paths depending on the answers to those questions. Now I have here a program called recommendations.py, and the goal of this program is to be able to recommend some card games to a user based on their preferences for difficulty and the number of players they want to play with. So it seems like our program should be able to take multiple paths, recommending to a user the right card game based on any given input the user might give to our program. Well, the first thing we should probably do is ask the user a question themselves to get data on how they're feeling about what kind of card game they want to play. So I'll first ask them a question using the Python input function to get some user input. And as we've seen before, I can give as input to input a string that will ask, let's say, a question to the user. Maybe the first question is, do you prefer difficult or casual card games? So difficult or casual. And why don't we store the result of whatever the user typed in a variable, maybe this one called difficulty, just like this. Now, next question would be, well, how many players do you want to play with? Do you want maybe multiplayer, as in more than one player, or do you want a single player game? Single player, just like this. And why don't we, just for consistency, capitalize these, just like that. And now, if I store this in the players variable, I'm able now to see that I have two variables storing both the difficulty the user wants and the number of players they might want to play with. Now, the question then becomes, how do we recommend a game based on the input the users gave us? Well, we have down here a function called recommend. I can simply pass as input to recommend a game, and we'll see in our terminal, you might like space followed by the game name itself. But that doesn't help us really up here. We can certainly call recommend, but how can we make sure the game actually depends on the input the user gave us? Well, for that we can use a conditional. And in Python, to make a conditional, we have this keyword called if. If. And if is followed by something called a Boolean expression, more on those later, but essentially a question we can ask that has a yes or no response. Now, maybe the first question I could ask is the difficulty here equal to, in this case, difficult? That is, did the user type in difficult, capital D? I'll go ahead and make sure this goes on a new kind of block in my code just for style's sake. And for now, why don't I leave this branch of code as just ... meaning I'll get back to it a little bit later. So this is our first conditional. We're asking the question, did the player type in capital D difficult for difficulty? And then whatever code is indented will run if this condition, this Boolean expression, is true. Okay, so what else could we do? Well, presumably the user might not always type in difficult. They could type in casual, for instance. Well, in that case, we could actually specify what should happen in the case that this condition is not true. Notice how on line 6, indented here, we'd have a branch in our code that will run if this condition is true, difficulty is equal to capital D difficult, but otherwise, else, if that's not the case, we'll run whatever code is now indented on line 8 and beyond if we'd like. So a good first question to ask, but now I think we should ask another question too about the number of players as well. So if, let's say, the player typed in difficulty difficult, but then we might also want to ask them, well, how many players do you want to play with? That could inform our recommendation. Within this branch, I could also ask another question. I could say, if players is equal to maybe multiplayer, ... then we could probably recommend some given game in this case. But of course, similar to difficulty, a player or a user could actually type in something different than multiplayer. They could type in single player, so we could make use of else here as well. Else ... So now we're kind of building up the branches of this program. Within this branch of difficult games, we'll ask the player, do they prefer multiplayer or single player? And if multiplayer, we'll take this path. If single player, we'll take this path. Let's do the same thing down below here, because even if the player specifies casual, well, we still want to make an informed decision of whether they wanted multiplayer or single player games too. So I'll go ahead and ask the same question. If players equals multiplayer, just like this, we'll have one branch of our code, else we'll have another branch just like this. And notice now there are 4 branches, 4 places we could end up with, which kind of makes sense. If we have given the player 2 options, difficulty and players, each of which has 2 possible inputs, well, there are 4 possible games we could recommend. So if a player wants a difficult multiplayer card game, maybe recommend to them poker, for instance. So I'll recommend poker. If they want a difficult single-player game, we could perhaps recommend to them maybe a game called Klondike, which is the kind of the classic solitaire game if you're familiar. But down below, let's see down here, if they want a casual game that is multiplayer, we could recommend maybe a game like Hearts. And if they want a casual, maybe single-player game, we could recommend one, maybe one like Clock, which is really just luck-based. So here now we have 4 games to recommend based on the input the user gave us. And this is our conditional structure. We're using conditionals to actually modify how our program runs, having it take different pathways depending on the input the user gave us. So let's try it. If I were to, in this case, run Python of recommendations.py and enter difficult, let's say difficult, and multiplayer, which game do you think we should get? Well, probably in this case, poker. Difficulty was difficult, so we'll be inside of this branch here. Now, players is now going to be multiplayer, so we'll end up at this branch here. I'll hit enter, and we'll see you might like poker. So pretty good. But what could go wrong in this case? So maybe the user is a little more malicious than we think they might be. Maybe they don't want even a casual game. They want something that's like a medium difficulty as well. So I'll type in medium. And maybe they want not just a multiplayer or a single player game. They actually want a 2-player game. And notice how these inputs are not explicitly talked about inside of our conditional. So I'm curious where we'll end up. If I hit enter here, we'll see you might like Clock. Now, Clock is definitively a single-player game, so we should not have ended up at Clock here, but there is a reason that we did. So we asked the question here, if difficulty is equal to capital D difficult, then we'll do this branch here. If that's not the case, though, we'll be in this branch down below here. Now, there are many other options besides just capital D difficult. A user could type in this case, I typed in medium, and because that was not equal to difficult, well, we're going to end up in this branch down here. And similarly, I typed in 2-player, which is definitely not multiplayer, so we then ended up at this particular branch here. So else is good when there are no other options you want to test for, but in this case, I'd argue we want to test if the user actually typed in this case, casual or single player explicitly. So let's see how we could do that with these conditionals. Well, it turns out there's one more keyword beyond if and else, one called Elif, which is kind of an elision, if you will, a collision of both else and if. And it's a way of asking some question if the prior condition was not true. So here I did ask if difficulty is equal to difficult, capital D, but otherwise if it's not, Elif, we could ask some other question as well. Maybe I'll ask if difficulty was equal to, in this case, casual, just like this with a capital C. And that opens up for me some new branch in my conditional structure. Now it seems to me that I actually want to move this conditional structure inside the branch that explicitly asks for casual games. So I'll go ahead and copy and paste this and move it inside this branch. And now, what should happen if we end up at this else branch here? Well, we know the player didn't type in difficult. We know they didn't type in casual. So maybe we could print something else entirely. We could say, maybe enter a valid difficulty, letting them know that we don't really know how to recommend games that are not either difficult or casual in this case. Now, what else can we do inside here? I think there's still the same problem with these 2 conditional structures here. Let's make use of Elif here as well. I'll say Elif players is equal to single player, just like this. That opens up a new branch that I can then move Klondike into. And then down below, why don't I print maybe enter a valid number of players, just like this. I'll do the same thing down below. In fact, I can copy and paste this for now down to this branch here, our casual branch. And now, oops, we want to make sure I actually change these recommendations to hearts and clock. And I think that should be set for us. So what have we done? We've made it able for us to actually check if the user has entered a value different from what we expected. We're now more flexible and less trusting of the user. So let's try this. I'll go ahead and I will run Python of recommendations.py. I'll hit enter and I'll type in, let's say, a casual game, maybe multiplayer, and that should put us at hearts, let's say. I see hearts, that's good. Now let's be a little more malicious. If I type in something like, medium and maybe 2-player as well, where do you think we'll end up? Well, it seems like we should end up in enter a valid difficulty. So we'll see, hit enter, and we will see enter a valid difficulty. So I argue that this program should work for us. If we were to enter in all combinations of difficult, single player, multiplayer, or casual, we'd get the right game that we would want to be recommending in this case. Now there are still some improvements to be made. Notice one here is this idea of copying and pasting. We'll probably do better than that. But for that, we need to learn more about this idea of a Boolean expressions. More on that another time.